Hi, everyone. Bryce Roberts here, VP of Marketing at Logicbroker. And what an exciting time for commerce. We've got discovery, evaluation, and purchasing decisions now being increasingly mediated by AI-driven systems. And that's forcing leaders to rethink visibility, trust, and control. Today, I'm joined by Logicbroker CEO Omar Qari. Omar, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining
Glad to
us.
be here.
Yeah. As at a high level of this exciting nexus in commerce, what have you seen over the last 6 to 12 months that make this conversation really urgent right now?
Yeah, it has been a very exciting past 6 to 12 months. I think there's a few things that in particular crossed over from being more experimental to actually being real. I think first, if you look back to May, we saw for the first time a payment was actually able to be tokenized and stored inside of an LLM. Being able to take a credit card and have it stored in there. We had for the first time transactions really became technically viable, right? Before that, that was not a thing. It was just an idea. And then over the summer of last year in 25, you had cart capabilities, checkout capabilities really starting to go live. I believe the first one was in Perplexity, and then by September it had also launched in ChatGPT. And that was this huge moment where everything shifted from what was largely being thought of as possible to inevitable, right? And I think once intent can turn into a completed transaction inside the LLM, then now it's like, all right, commerce is no longer this adjacent area for these LLMs. Like this is very deeply embedded. And so that's where we were. And then since then, there's been this increasing shift, right? Where consumers, they have started to really begin their consumer shopping journey in the LLMs, right? So that's something that's also been new and increasing. If you look at the volumes and things like that on the transactable side, those have not yet arrived, but so much of the search has started on LLMs that now some of the actual e-commerce websites, they're starting to see this significant decrease in the amount of traffic. That, mainly as a result of Google search traffic no longer coming as regularly. And so all those investment dollars that were going into SEM, the ROI on those has started to shift down over the last 6 to 12 months, right? Because they've been putting in these dollars, but then you've got Google in their AI summaries starting to essentially, jump in between before you can actually click on your blue link. That's been soaking up a lot of the traffic. The other LLMs have been soaking up more of the traffic. And so these retailers and brands, they're seeing like, okay, now we need to figure out how do we get our search, how do we get our discoverability back up, because we're just not getting the kind of traffic that we used to. And so yeah, it's been a pretty wild 6 to 12 months here in commerce in general.
Absolutely. I love your take of from possible to inevitable. And I'd love to share some findings from a survey we recently did. So this is 600 enterprise e-commerce decision makers that we talked to. And when it comes to AI-driven capabilities, so it doesn't have to be full-on purchasing through the LLM like you talked about. It could be things like chatbots. It could be generative content around product information, things like that. But a full 95.5% of organizations report they've deployed at least one agentic commerce capability. So that resounds with this transition that's happened very fast from possible to inevitable. When you hear 95.5% already deployed something, what does that tell you about where the market really is? Are we going full into how fast and how well is the phase that we're in now?
Well, I find the number 95.5% very amusing, to be honest, because, I'm just thinking about what some of these respondents are willing to kind of squint at and call agentic to make themselves feel better about not falling behind. That's a pretty high percentage. But in terms of especially if I think about actually having deployed something, I think you were saying like 95.5% have deployed something. So if I could do my like one eyebrow raise, which I can't do, but if I could, I would do that. Look, I think what it does do, right, to speak more directly to your question, is I think it underlines the fact that we're obviously past if, right? If people are literally lying to themselves that they've already done something, then it's not a matter of if anymore, right? It's a matter of what, how quickly, and right, with what level of effort, right? And in terms of the what, I think, retailers and brands, they need to determine, are we starting with discoverability in the LLMs? Are we starting with improving agentic search on our site? Like, how far upstream do I go? Do I need to go back to my source of truth to clean up all my unstructured product data? Can I correct for that downstream, right? And still get a lot of benefit and maybe go back and clean up the structured product data later. I think there's just a lot of factors to consider there in terms of the timing and effort. In terms of the speed, the how quickly, I mean, look, this is not a new story, right? We've seen this play out many times in other industries and even within commerce, where if you're an enterprise retailer or brand and you've already got a certain level of domain authority, up until recently, everyone had their turf staked out, right? Certainly there were battles using marketing dollars to kind of scream louder about your particular product or service. There was you could launch products to kind of change the perception of what you are as a brand. You could maybe mix up the assortment of your product offering by doing things like dropship or marketplace. But it was really a matter of percentage points or even fractions of a percentage point that you were able to influence. But I think now, like every 5 to 15 years, there's some type of major upheaval that comes. And we've just gone through such a change where it's now a very different world. Consumer behavior itself has shifted massively. Our research is just our being like me as a consumer is starting in completely new places that it hadn't previously. Like I'm jumping into ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever it is, and what that means is I am much more susceptible as a consumer to having my intent converted in a new channel, right? Or even if that channel is just going to direct me to the same e-commerce site of some, brand or retailer, then I'm still susceptible to this, thinking from like an engineering perspective, like a man in the middle attack of having my intent converted further upstream and closer to where my research was initiated. This is not a situation where it's a matter of fractions of a percentage point. I think this is indicating that there's going to be major swings in market share at risk. And so, what I discuss with these, C-level folks at these retailers and brands is you've got to get out there and defend your turf. And you've got to do that by investing in making sure not only that you're discoverable in these other channels, but that the consumer experience is equally fantastic in shopping there.
The upheaval has happened. The risks are very high, and you really have to defend your turf. And what we're seeing from the data is that retailers, brands are making big investments in this area. I think a lot of them are not taking it lightly. They are recognizing the moment for what it is, being upheaval. We have some stats that 47.3% of respondents expect to invest $1 million or more in the next 12 months, and a full 21.2% are planning $5 million more towards agentic commerce. So in those conversations you referred to with the C-suite, how are you seeing that they're directing their efforts? So is that an investment wave around growth, cost control, resilience, competitive pressure? You talked about going upstream in the customer journey. How are they talking about it?
Yeah, I think there's an argument to be made for each. Look, when I speak to board members or the CEOs at these large kind of retailers and brands, what's top of mind right now for them is protecting the brand trust, and they really care about regaining control of the customer journey. I think that's the piece that feels most acute for them as a pain point right now, how they've lost that. I think they realize that, whether they do anything or not, the LLMs are still out there, right? They're scraping, they're doing what they do. And if the brands and retailers don't grab the bull by the horns and actually gain control of that consumer shopping journey, it's just going to put their own brand at risk, because consumers aren't going to blame the channel aggregator, right? They're not going to blame where something was first discovered in the first place. They're going to blame the brand, and they're going to do that if it's not a great experience, in any way for them along that consumer shopping journey, whether the brand was involved or not. And there are, I think there's easier and there's harder ways of doing this, right? We were discussing with one customer, you could have an entire merchandising team of, 20 or 30 people toiling away on the website, trying to create a lot of semantic context around every PDP and to make it so that the LLM is going to be able to screen scrape that in and, be able to train the model on that more effectively. Or you could essentially inject the product catalog straight into the LLM with all the semantic search context. I like to use the example of, it's sort of like when you go to a hospital, and I think this is true, they don't just hand you a Tylenol and like, here, take this Tylenol pill with a jug of water. They just put it in your IV bag, right? The fastest way to get the medicine into the body is by putting it straight into the bloodstream. And that's basically the objective here with LLMs, right? And syndicating the product data straight into them. I think the risk of not doing this is that the AI agents, they start influencing what gets bought. And for you as a retailer, not kind of being there, you're essentially invisible to those agents, and that's going to become a real revenue risk.
Some of the talking points you had really caught me. This idea of segmentation of the top moats out there, the top current domain authorities, I guess we could say in the old world, driven by SEO and high paid media spends, things like that. And maybe this other segmentation of the top innovators, the people doing it the right way. And I can really appreciate the fact it's probably very confusing and a very busy space for retailers. We saw from the statistics in the survey, 56.5% were thinking about implementing an AI shopping agent, whereas 53% were going for predictive inventory analytics, completely separate deployment of AI power, 51.5% on automated Oracle orchestration. So there's probably a million solutions coming at them from all angles. I think your point is well taken of the top ones that are thinking about it right, keep the moat, keep the domain authority, and go as direct as possible with the product information to get ahead of it, because the LLMs are not going to cater their every whim to you. They're just going to do what they do by stock. And so you spoke on this a little bit. Just curious, are there internal operating models? Are there mindsets as people are doing this the right way? They're doing the IV of the Tylenol and not the tablets. What kind of conversations are they having? How are they talking to you about these decisions?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, look, a lot of the focus has been on the AI shopping agents and sort of the demand side of the problem. And I think what's absolutely critical that the retailers and brands need to get focused on is kind of balancing that investment across their entire end-to-end operation. So right now, I think the actual marketing complexity of these retailers and brands is scaling much faster than the actual operational discipline. And so you've got these brands, they're investing heavily in content optimization, in retail media, in now trying to invest more in the AI visibility side of things. But if you actually look behind the scenes and you kind of look under the mattress, if you will, the inventory feeds, the supplier connectivity, the clarity around all the fulfillment side, those are all still pretty loosely connected. And I think as the marketing side continues to grow much faster, the gap is continuing to widen because all the energy is going into the discovery side of things. And so what we're seeing in terms of the teams themselves inside of these retailers is a tension between the commercial teams and the operations team. So marketing can keep kind of driving traffic through these new channels, and they can make sure they're included in the AI driven discovery, and but ultimately operations is left kind of taking the brunt of the fallout when an order can't be fulfilled because it was not actually in inventory, or if there's excess cancellations or substitutions need to be made, right? Or shipments end up being delayed, or these days there's even some that are figuring out manual workarounds. They're like, oh, we'll kind of hack it a bit until we get some more volume up. And I think the retailers that are navigating this well are the ones who are treating the inventory availability and the promise of being able to deliver that order as like truly strategic infrastructure, right? I think these are the ones where they're taking inventory accuracy very seriously, the supplier integrations, making sure everything is able to be updated in real time. And the ones who are struggling are the ones who think that this is just a AI exposure problem, right? And they see this as a demand only problem, like, oh, all my traffic was coming through there and now it's not, and this is just a demand problem. I think what they're going to find is the AI is just increasing the velocity of commerce, which means that any weakness on the fulfillment side is only going to be exacerbated as the velocity continues to increase. All of the areas it's disconnected is just going to get exposed that much faster.
That was really well said. This idea of an internal tug of war being more of a hindrance than just the topic at large is exactly what we saw in the survey as well. So the folks that chalk this up to, we don't have overall leadership buy-in to go more heavily into agentic commerce, that was only 12% of respondents. But what we did see is that other things were coming up around the data readiness, integration complexity, and they're really pinning numbers in other cases as the bigger impediments. Have you had any success really helping put the thumb on the scale, help solve this tug of war, really giving the operations, some of the back-end teams more leverage, more firepower to go to the table? And maybe if the merchandising or marketing teams are still having too big of a seat at the table, some of their channels are dying off, but they're still kind of driving that older style of doing things. It sounds like we really need to give a hand to the operations folks.
I see it starting to head in this direction, but not nearly fast enough. I think that a lot of the retailers and brands are going to find themselves in a bit of a pickle when they've got a lot of the demand side solved, but they were not as focused on figuring out what does fulfillment look like in this more AI-driven commerce world.
And it would be complex enough if they had to balance that on one LLM or two. But of course, there's many choices and many things to choose from. And organizations have to make some tough decisions and probably focus on some things. I kind of want to go back to the earlier point of the top tier retailers thinking about this the right way to really keep the eye on the prize of that domain authority, that moat of a good brand experience, and really focus on the customer experience as driving the decisions around which ecosystem, which integration versus the other way around, and keeping it backwards. So as we think about the customer experience, and for those folks really hyper-focused on that, we could use the three lenses of visibility, trust, and control. And so when decision-making moves upstream into these AI-led environments, as you said, what replaces the winning click?
I think winning the click gets replaced by being the trusted input. I think, what is that new gate, right? The gate now is that your business is essentially machine readable, right? Like that's that, and is it both machine readable and then machine preferred? So it's like, all right, bare minimum, you need to be machine readable. Where you really want to get to is being machine preferred, and that's where the influence comes in your semantic context. And I think ultimately that comes down to structured product data, right? So do you have structured product data? Do you have accurate inventory? Do you have reliable fulfillment? Do you have clear policies? Like, are there, because each of these is going to be an input for the agents, right? So the agents, they're now going to take all of this into account. How often was something delivered on time? How fast was it? What was the shipping cost? Like, everything's going to get taken into account. And agents, they don't just kind of browse, right? They're systematically shortlisting based on all the criteria. So you still have to win the click in a sense, but the way to get there is different now.
Great. I love that. You talked about the fulfillment as part of the experience. And so what does this AI-mediated environment really point to where brands should put their resources and focus on in terms of customer trust of their brand when they're going through the LLM shopping experience?
Like trust is becoming less emotional and more probabilistic, right? Like if you think about it, you've got these systems now, right? And so the systems, they're going to trust what is predictable. So what are things like high domain authority, right? That's still going to be a factor. Supplier reliability is going to be a factor. Delivery reliability, that's going to be a factor, right? So trust is basically shifting towards who's got the lowest exception rates, who's got the lowest return rates, how accurate was the delivery promise? So not even necessarily the fastest, but did you deliver it in the timeline that you promised you were going to? Just consistency. And so I think trust is essentially becoming increasingly operationalized.
That's a great point. As we think about brands, how brands seek to control the customer experience now through a bit of a proxy, or now there's a different gateway to your point. How do they think about it, and what should they be doing to really maintain that control?
Yeah, I mean, for years, brands believed that they controlled traffic through SEO and paid search. And in reality, they were probably renting it from platforms. And I think now that you see discovery is kind of moving towards these AI environments or these LLMs, the rental agreement is changing, right? And so if you're not going to participate in this new discovery layer, then the traffic it's not just going to decline gradually, like it's just going to reroute, right? And that's going to continue to happen as this discovery is moving upstream and changing how consumers shop.
Amazing. So the opportunity in new revenue and defense of existing revenue and agentic commerce is not up for debate anymore. It's pretty clear. Now, as we talked a little bit before about the prioritization, what would you say, how would you help C-suite board members really sort out what has to happen now, what's an immediate need versus a nice to have down the road?
I think the leaders of these companies, look, in this agent mediated world, the biggest risk is becoming, like a passive endpoint where someone else's system is kind of just deciding pricing and substitution and fulfillment promises and like the customer terms. And so I think what's going to be particularly important is that these large enterprise retailers and brands and the leaders of them are particularly focused on how they can make sure that they are defending these boundaries that they set now with the LLMs. And frankly, I think right now is the time of maximal leverage, right? Because the LLMs, as we speak to them, they're looking for proof points of success. They're looking for the retailers and brands that they can point to and say, look how amazing that this experience is going. More consumers come and begin your shopping journey here and conclude your shopping journey here, and try to attract more of the retailers and brands to pay attention to that. What does that mean? That means that the brands and retailers actually have leverage. So this is like the early days when Google was first coming onto the scene, before they lost all of the leverage there. And I think now is the time to ask and to demand that you get not only the consumer shopping experience you want to created within the LLMs, but also access to the data, access to the semantic search data. So the same way you get your 4 keywords, how do you get your 40 word discussion that led to this search coming to your site or resulting in this purchase? Like, now is the time of maximal leverage where they should be leaning in and taking advantage.
Sounds like it's really the new frontier is opened, and then in a disruptive environment, there's this land grab mentality for it, right? So strike while the iron's hot, make sure that you make good decisions, but quick decisions, and don't wait around to see how this all shakes out. The early movers definitely have an advantage from what we're seeing in the data and the conversations we've been having. So I absolutely enjoyed this conversation about the customer journey, particularly the early parts of the customer journey around discovery, and then through the brand promise of inventory availability, deliverability, fulfillment, all those aspects. We have Connected Commerce coming up in May 7th in New York City, where we're going to dive into the changing and evolving customer, in addition to many other topics around agentic commerce. The theme for the event is the Agentic Shift, and we'll be met with industry leaders, with thought leaders, folks that want to join this conversation in the nature of panels, fireside chats, networking, broader discussions, breakouts, all that jazz. So just want to invite everyone to Connected Commerce 2026 on May 7th. You can find details on logicbroker.com. Omar, what are you the most excited about in terms of Connected Commerce coming up?
My favorite part is actually having the off-the-record conversations, right? And giving these companies a chance to hear what's actually being discussed in the back rooms. At some of these larger conferences, you frequently don't get to do that. And here we're going to have a lot of the leaders present. And this is exactly the moment to have those. I feel like a lot of even competitors in this type of environment, they're very comfortable just kind of sharing best practices and talking about what's real in the space, and especially discussing everything around agentic and where they're focused.
As a recap for everything we just talked about, do you have one takeaway that you would want a leader to get going with after this conversation?
I mean, I'll leave you with a hard truth, which is if you are not on the agent short list, you don't exist, right? So the job now is to make your business a trusted input into this AI-driven commerce before the entire volume kind of shifts over. So now's the time.
Very well said. I really enjoyed this conversation, Omar. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah. Thanks, Bryce.